Okay, let's get started. So lactic acid, lactate, you hear these two words used interchangeably, and they are not the same thing. So lactic acid has the ability to donate hydrogen ions, and when that happens, the conjugate base of that is lactate. So they're similar, but chemically speaking, they are completely different. So um, lactate is not an acid. It cannot donate a hydrogen ion. And when we are exercising, the body produces and uses lactate and not lactic acid. And that's going to become important as we go along here in this lecture. So, lactate, lactic acid, two different things. The body makes lactate, not lactic acid during exercise. So, let's talk about the Cori cycle. What is it? Basically, it's how lactate goes from the muscle to the liver. It gets converted into glucose and back into the muscle. So that's the short description of the Cori cycle. When does it happen? Like all energy systems, your body is constantly moving and working, but the Cori cycle becomes more important and helpful during higher intensity exercises. Okay, where does it happen? It happens in the muscle, in the liver, and the bloodstream. Those are the three main points that are all involved in the Cori cycle. How does it happen? Like I said, continuously, your body's always working, your energy systems are coexisting and working at the same time. But when exercise intensity increases, this pathway becomes more important and gets used more. And why does it happen? So the Cori cycle is a way for the body to, or the muscle, to get rid of the lactate and to use it to create energy. So lactate, people thought it was some kind of byproduct or waste product, but lactate is actually used um, by our bodies to create energy, especially when you're exercising with high intensity. Okay, and that is the Cori cycle. So, what exactly is it? What are the steps? We'll kind of walk through it right here. So, it starts in the muscle with glycolysis. So, glucose turns into pyruvate. And remember, there's two types of metabolism, aerobic and anaerobic. And so, this was aerobic, the pyruvate would go into acetyl CoA. But as I mentioned, with higher intensity, it's really tough for the muscle to get the oxygen it needs um, to break glucose further down into the mitochondria. So with anaerobic metabolism, which is without oxygen, and where the Cori cycle is really used, the pyruvate turns into lactate. And anytime pyruvate turns into lactate, you get one molecule of lactate and you get one hydrogen ion. And this will be important later, but remember that. Okay? So anytime pyruvate is broken down, one lactate molecule, one hydrogen ion is created as well. So when this happens during anaerobic metabolism, without oxygen, lactate is made. Okay, it goes through the blood. It stays lactate when it gets into the liver, and then it goes through the process of gluconeogenesis, which basically means you make glucose, new glucose. And so the reverse happens in the liver. So lactate goes from pyruvate, then it gets broken down to glucose, it goes back in the blood as glucose, and then it's in the muscle and goes through glycolysis once again. Remember, when glucose gets turned into pyruvate, there's two ATP that is formed. Okay, so as you can see, the lactate is going through the blood into the liver, is being turned into glucose once again to be used in the muscle for energy. And that's basically what's happening in the Cori cycle. So what is the impact of lactate and the Cori cycle? So as I mentioned, lactate is actually a fuel source. It is not waste or a byproduct of exercise. And so 70 to 75% of lactate that is produced during exercise gets used as a fuel source during exercise. And the higher the intensity, the more lactate is being produced, and the more lactate um, is being cleared out or goes into the Cori cycle into the liver. Okay, but your body turns lactate into a fuel source, and as you saw in the previous slide, every time the lactate comes back through the liver into the muscle as glucose, it gets broken down again to pyruvate, but then you have your two ATP that come as a result of it. Okay, so the body's constantly using it as a fuel source during high intensity exercises. With training, you can increase your lactate threshold. So what is that? Basically, lactate threshold is the point where your body produces more lactate than the muscle can get out during this process of the Cori cycle. So at some point for everyone, you're just going to accumulate too much lactate, and you won't be able to clear it out fast enough to create the energy that you need. So with training, you can slow this process down, which means as you train, you're able to produce more lactate, but you're also able to pull that lactate out of the muscle into the liver to be used as an energy source. So training will make the Cori cycle more efficient, in other words. So the more you train, the more lactate you'll be able to use, the higher that lactate threshold becomes, and then you can get more lactate out of the muscle into the liver to be used as energy during your exercises, during your workouts. So, it's lactate the cause of the burning sensation that you get when you're working out. So, you hear guys at the gym, oh, it's that lactic acid in my muscle. As we started off, we know that the body does not produce lactic acid during exercise. It's lactate. And lactate is not an acid. It's the base. So what's happening when people are saying this? So what's really happening is that if we go back, and I told you to remember this, so hopefully you did, when the pyruvate is being turned into lactate, you get one molecule of lactate and one hydrogen ion is produced. And so obviously the more lactate you get, the more hydrogen ions are being produced. And if you go back to the lactate threshold, at some point your body can't get out all the lactate that's being produced, which also means the hydrogen ions are not being pulled out of the muscle either. And so the more hydrogen ions you get that are trapped in the muscle, the more acidic or the lower your pH is in that muscle. And when that happens, that is when all these bad things happen. Basically, your cells begin to die. That's when you get hurt. That's when you get injured. That's when all these bad things take place. Okay, so without the Cori cycle acting as a buffer, so to speak, then you wouldn't be able to continue your exercise at the intensity that you're able to, and for not as long. So the Cori cycle enables you to use the lactate as fuel so that you can push on, go a little further into your exercise. But at the same time, it's also acting as a buffer against all these hydrogen ions that are being formed as well during the process. So without it, without the lactate, you would just have hydrogen ions in your muscle, and your workout would be completely done and stopped, and you wouldn't have that extra fuel to push through that. So lactate is your friend or your foe. It's been given a bad rap. It's actually your friend. Okay, with lactate, you're able to go a little further in your workout. You're able to sustain that higher intensity a little longer, or maybe push through and get to a higher intensity than previously before if you've been training. Like I said, if you've been training, that lactate is becoming more efficient. You're able to pull it out of your muscle into the liver to be reused as energy. And without it, that pH would drop dramatically very quickly, much sooner than it does with the lactate in your muscle. And with that, we know that bad things will happen to you. So that's lactate. It's your friend. That's how it works. So tell the guy at the gym, it's not lactic acid, buddy. It's hydrogen ions. That's it. Take care.